You remember the big ones: Knight Rider, The A-Team, Alf, MacGyver. These shows owned the 80s. They ruled prime time, and they're still replayed, rebooted, and referenced, well, decades later. But nestled between those giants were dozens of other shows, quirky, ambitious, sometimes strange little experiments that flickered onto your screen for a season or two, captured your imagination in ways you didn't even realize, and then vanished. No reunion specials, no streaming revivals. Just gone. But if you grew up in the 80s, some part of you still remembers the theme songs, the characters, that feeling of rushing home to catch them before they disappeared into the static. Today, we're rediscovering those forgotten 1980s TV shows that quietly shaped who you became. Welcome to Timewashed Stories. This is where we dig into the textures of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Not just what happened, but what it felt like to live through those years. If you love being pulled back into those lost afternoons, those Saturday morning rituals, those moments that shaped your childhood without you even knowing it, consider hitting subscribe so you don't miss the next trip back in time. All right, let's start with a hero who never quite figured out how to fly straight. A mild-mannered teacher finds a supersuit from aliens, but there's one problem. He loses the instruction manual. So every time he tries to fly, he crashes. Every time he tries to use his powers, something goes hilariously, dangerously wrong. That was The Greatest American Hero. And if you watched it, you remember that shit red suit with the cape, that iconic theme song, Believe It or Not, and the absolute joy of watching a superhero who had no idea what he was doing. It aired from 1981 to 1983, just 3 seasons, and it was this perfect blend of comedy, adventure, and heart. You'd watch Ralph Hinckley stumble through, saving the world while trying to keep his teaching job, and somehow it felt more real than any polished superhero. There were talks of reboots over the years. One almost happened in the 2000s, but nothing ever stuck. Maybe because this show belonged to a specific moment when you could root for the underdog who literally couldn't land without crashing through a roof. It taught you that heroes don't have to be perfect. They just have to keep trying. If The Greatest American Hero was about a clumsy hero, Ottoman was about one who was impossibly sleek. A computer programmer creates a holographic crime-fighting superhero who could drive a car that made perfect 90-degree turns, leaving glowing blue trails on the highway. It was Tron meets Knight Rider, and for one glorious season in 1983, it was the coolest thing on TV. You remember Ottoman's glowing blue suit, the way he'd materialize out of thin air, and Cursor, that little floating sidekick who could create anything Ottoman needed. A helicopter, a sports car, whatever the plot required, Cursor just drew it into existence. It only lasted 13 episodes before it was canceled, a victim of high production costs and low ratings. But if you caught it during that brief window, you wanted your own holographic friend. You wanted to live in a world where technology was that magical, that limitless. And on some level, you still kind of do. Now, if you thought that premise was wild, this next one took it even further. A man who could transform into any animal to fight crime. That was Manimal. Professor Jonathan Chase had the ability to shapeshift, usually into a hawk or a black panther, and he'd use these powers to solve crimes that the police couldn't handle. It was absurd. It was ambitious. It lasted exactly 8 episodes in 1983. But here's the thing. If you were a kid watching Manimal, you didn't care that the transformation sequences were expensive and repetitive, or that the plots were thin. You cared that a man could turn into a panther. You'd imitate the transformation sounds. You'd pretend you could do it too, running around your backyard, imagining what animal you'd become. The show became a cult curiosity, referenced in pop culture as this bizarre footnote of 80s television. But for the kids who saw it, it was 8 weeks of pure, unfiltered fantasy. And that's more than most shows ever give you. On the stranger side of 80s TV, there was a show that turned history class into an adventure. Voyagers followed Phineas Fogg, a time traveler with a malfunctioning Omni, a pocket watch-like device that let him jump through history, and Jeffrey, a 12-year-old kid who accidentally got pulled into the adventure. Together, they'd land in different historical moments, fix events that had gone wrong, and make sure history stayed on track. It aired on NBC from 1982 to 1983, just one season, 20 episodes. But what a season! One week you'd be with them during the American Revolution. The next you'd be escaping the Titanic or meeting ancient Egyptians. The Omni would glow red if history was wrong, green if everything was okay. And you'd sit there, watching Jeffrey, just a kid like you, become a hero in every era imaginable. John Eric Hexam played Phineas with this roguish charm, and his tragic death in 1984 cast a shadow over the show's legacy. But for the kids who watched, Voyagers made history feel alive, urgent, and endlessly exciting. Did you ever wish you had an Omni of your own? Of course you did. This one felt like the 80s distilled into a single show. A group of young people with superpowers. A guy who could shrink, another who could shoot electricity from his hands, a woman who could teleport, and a teenage rock star who could freeze things, team up to solve crimes and fight injustice. Misfits of Science aired for one season in 1985, and it had everything: a killer synth theme song, neon-lit aesthetics, and that scrappy, rebellious energy that defined the decade. The cast was led by Dean Paul Martin, yes, Dean Martin's son, and a young Courtney Cox in one of her earliest roles, years before Friends made her a household name. The show never found its audience, canceled after just 16 episodes, but it had heart. It had characters you wanted to hang out with, powers that felt just grounded enough to imagine yourself having. And it had that underlying message: being different, being a misfit, wasn't something to hide. It was your superpower. If you caught this show on a Friday night, you got it. You felt it. While those shows leaned into superpowers and sci-fi, this next one made you believe that you could be the hero, armed with nothing but a computer. WizKids followed a teenage hacker named Richie Adler, who used his Atari computer and modem to solve crimes, uncover conspiracies, and outsmart adults who underestimated him. It aired from 1983 to 1984, just one season, but it was a snapshot of a moment when computers were mysterious, thrilling, almost magical. You'd watch Richie type away on that chunky keyboard, the screen filling with green text, and somehow he'd break into government databases or track down criminals. It was every nerdy kid's fantasy, that the weird thing you loved, computers, technology, tinkering with code, could make you powerful. The show didn't shy away from real-world issues either, tackling everything from nuclear threats to corporate corruption. It was canceled before it could fully find its footing, but for the kids who watched, WizKids planted a seed. It made you believe that technology wasn't just toys and games. It was the future, and maybe you could be part of building it. An inventor creates a lifelike robot girl named Vicky and tries to pass her off as his adopted daughter. That was Small Wonder, and it was bizarre, campy, and somehow deeply endearing. Vicky spoke in a flat, robotic monotone, had superhuman strength, and would occasionally malfunction in ways that created absolute chaos. It aired in syndication from 1985 to 1989. 4 seasons of strange, low-budget sci-fi sitcom magic. You remember the way Vicky would tilt her head, the way she'd say, "Error, error," when something confused her. You remember her red dress, and the way other kids on the show never quite figured out she wasn't human. The effects were cheap, the plots were repetitive, but there was something oddly comforting about it. Maybe it was the idea that even a robot could be part of a family, could learn to be human. Or maybe it was just fun to imagine what it would be like to have a super strong sibling who could do your chores in seconds. Small Wonder wasn't high art, but it didn't need to be. It was Saturday morning absurdity, and that was enough. On the weirder end of the spectrum, let's talk about a show that felt like a fever dream. Misfits of Science already showed us superpowered teens. But if you wanted something even stranger, there was Otherworld. A family on vacation in Egypt accidentally gets transported to an alternate dimension, a parallel universe ruled by science, zones with different laws of physics, and bizarre civilizations. They spend the entire series trying to find their way home, jumping from zone to zone, each one stranger than the last. Otherworld aired in 1985 for just 8 episodes, and it was weird. One zone might be a dystopian society where emotions were illegal. Another might be a medieval kingdom with futuristic technology. The family, parents and 3 kids, had to navigate these worlds, avoid the authorities hunting them, and somehow stay together. It was ambitious, creative, and maybe too strange for its own good. CBS pulled the plug quickly, leaving fans with an unresolved cliffhanger. But if you were a kid flipping through channels and stumbled onto Otherworld, it stuck with you. It felt like a show that shouldn't exist, like you'd discovered something secret and wonderfully odd. And isn't that what the best TV moments feel like? From parallel dimensions, let's ground ourselves in something a bit more down to earth. Adventure, mystery, and a kid with a jetpack. A teenage alien prince, hiding on Earth, trying to blend in at high school while developing his psychic and telekinetic powers. That was the powers of Matthew Starr, and it ran for 1 season from 1982 to 1983. Matthew was on the run, his home planet destroyed, and his mentor, a guardian posing as a science teacher, helped him navigate life as a fugitive prince with superhuman abilities. The show had action, heart, and that classic 80s blend of sci-fi and teen drama. You'd watch Matthew struggle with fitting in, knowing he was different, knowing he could never fully belong. And you'd see him use his powers, moving objects with his mind, sensing danger, in ways that felt earned, not flashy. Peter Barton played Matthew with a quiet intensity, and Louis Gossett Jr. brought gravitas as his protector. It didn't last long, but it asked a question that resonated with every kid watching. What if you were special, but being special meant you could never truly be yourself? It was heavier than it needed to be, and that's why it mattered. An ancient astronaut awakens after thousands of years in suspended animation, possessing an amulet that gives him incredible powers. He searches for his lost love, evades a shadowy government agency, and tries to make sense of the modern world. The Phoenix aired in 1982, just 5 episodes before it was canceled. But what a premise. Judson Scott played Bennu of the Golden Light, the alien with the amulet, and he brought this ethereal, otherworldly quality to the role. The show had mystery, action, and a haunting melancholy. Bennu was a man out of time, searching for something he might never find. It was too expensive, too unusual, and it disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived. But if you caught even 1 episode, you remember that amulet, glowing with ancient power. You remember the idea that someone could sleep for millennia and wake up in a world that had forgotten them. It was mythology meets sci-fi, and it deserved more than 5 episodes. It deserved to be remembered. By day, he's a police public relations officer. By night, he rides a motorcycle capable of speeds over 300 miles per hour, equipped with weapons, shields, and enough tech to make Knight Rider jealous. That was Street Hawk, and it aired for 1 season in 1985. Jesse Mach, injured in the line of duty, becomes the test pilot for this experimental superbike, and he uses it to fight crime in ways the regular police can't. You remember that bike. The black, sleek design, the way it would leap over obstacles, the heads-up display in the helmet, the computerized voice guiding Jesse through every mission. The theme music was pure 80s adrenaline, and the action sequences were genuinely thrilling. It was canceled after 13 episodes, blamed on low ratings and behind-the-scenes issues. But for the kids who watched, Street Hawk was everything. You wanted that bike. You wanted that helmet. You'd ride your own bicycle pretending it was a superpowered machine, capable of anything. And for those few months, it was on the air. It made you feel like the future had already arrived. Created by Isaac Asimov. Yes, that Isaac Asimov. Probe was a short-lived sci-fi mystery show that aired in 1988. It followed Austin James, a brilliant, eccentric scientist who solved impossible cases using his genius-level intellect and cutting-edge technology. Think MacGyver meets Sherlock Holmes, filtered through a hard, sci-fi lens. The show only lasted 7 episodes, a victim of bad scheduling and limited promotion, but it had ambition. Each case was a puzzle wrapped in science. How do you solve a locked room mystery with physics? How do you catch a killer using chemistry? Parker Stevenson played Austin with a quirky intensity, and the show had a cult following among sci-fi fans who appreciated its cerebral approach. It never got the audience it needed, but for the people who found it, Probe was a reminder that science could be as thrilling as any car chase or explosion. It respected your intelligence, and that was rare. Before Small Wonder gave us a robot daughter, there was Holmes and Yo-Yo, a 1976 show that technically predates the 80s, but it was rerun so often during the early 80s on syndication that it became part of the decade's texture. Detective Holmes gets partnered with Yo-Yo, a clumsy android cop who's supposed to be the perfect officer but constantly malfunctions in hilarious ways. It was slapstick, goofy, and nowhere near as sophisticated as its premise suggested, lasting only 13 episodes. But you'd catch it on lazy Saturday afternoons, and you'd laugh at Yo-Yo's malfunctions, sparks flying, circuits shorting, the poor robot detective bumbling through cases. It was comfort food television, the kind of show that didn't ask much of you except to sit back and enjoy the absurdity. And sometimes that's exactly what you needed, based very loosely on the real-life adventures of Frank Buck, an animal trapper in 1930s. Singapore, Bring 'Em Back Alive, aired from 1982 to 1983 and turned history into pulp adventure. Bruce Boxleitner played Frank Buck, swinging through jungles, evading warlords, smuggling secrets, and yes, occasionally capturing exotic animals. It was Indiana Jones for television, complete with cliffhangers, exotic locations, and a roguish hero who always had a wisecrack ready. The show lasted 17 episodes, and while it never quite found mainstream success, it had style. That theme music, that sense of danger and romance in every frame. You'd watch it and dream of adventure, of traveling to far-off places where anything could happen. Bruce Boxleitner, who'd later star in Scarecrow and Mrs. King in Babylon 5, brought charm and energy to every episode. And for a moment, you believed the world was still full of undiscovered corners, waiting for someone brave enough to explore them. A toy maker uses his inventions to fight crime and help people in need, traveling across the country in a custom van with his young apprentice. The Wizard aired from 1986 to 1987. Just one season, but it had heart. Simon McKay, played by David Rappaport, was a brilliant inventor, and also a little person, something the show never shied away from or exploited. It was simply part of who he was. The gadgets were the draw. McKay's inventions could do almost anything, and each episode featured new toys and tools used to outsmart criminals or rescue people in danger. But the real magic was the relationship between McKay and Alex, the teenager he mentored. It was gentle, thoughtful, and genuinely touching. David Rappaport brought warmth and intelligence to the role, and his tragic death in 1990 adds a layer of sadness to the show's legacy. But if you watched The Wizard, you remember it as a show that celebrated creativity, kindness, and the idea that anyone, no matter their size, their background, their circumstances, could be a hero. Okay, this one was a cartoon, but it was too weird, and too 80s not to mention. Dinosaurs aired in 1987. One season, 65 episodes, and it was about a team of intelligent, anthropomorphic dinosaurs from outer space who came to Earth to protect it from the evil Tyrannos. And yes, they could transform into rocket ships. It was He-Man meets Transformers meets The Land Before Time, and it made absolutely no sense. But you didn't care. You remember the bright colors, the over-the-top action, the terrible puns. There were toys, of course, though they never quite took off the way other 80s toy lines did. Dinosaurs disappeared as quickly as it arrived, barely remembered today. But if you were flipping through Saturday morning cartoons and landed on it, you stayed. Because dinosaurs. In space. Fighting evil. What else did you need? Technically, a 70s show, but like Holmes and Yo-Yo, it found new life in 80s syndication. Andrea Thomas, a high school science teacher, discovers an ancient amulet that transforms her into Isis, an Egyptian goddess with superpowers. She'd shout, "O mighty Isis," and transform in a swirl of light, then use her powers to help students, stop criminals, and teach lessons about courage and responsibility. It was earnest, low budget, and deeply sincere. Joanna Cameron played Isis with warmth and strength, and the show was one of the first to feature a female superhero in a leading role. You'd watch it after school or on weekends, and even though the effects were dated, even though the plots were simple, it mattered. Because Isis wasn't a sidekick. She wasn't someone's girlfriend. She was the hero. And for girls watching, that meant everything. A con man and a stockbroker team up to become private detectives, inspired by pulp detective novels. That was 10 Speed and Brown Shoe, a short-lived 1980 series that starred Ben Vereen and Jeff Goldblum. Yes, that Jeff Goldblum, years before Jurassic Park and Independence Day. The show lasted just one season, 14 episodes, but it had style. Vereen brought charisma and flash as E.L. 10-Speed Turner, a streetwise hustler, while Goldblum played Lionel Brownshoe Whitney, a naive accountant obsessed with detective fiction. The chemistry between them was electric, the banter was sharp, and the cases were quirky and fun. It never found its audience, but it's become a cult classic, remembered fondly by the people who saw it. And if you were one of them, you know exactly why. It was charm, wit, and heart, wrapped in a buddy cop package that felt fresh even when it was leaning into every trope in the book. Wait, Airwolf wasn't forgotten. It was huge. But here's the thing. While everyone remembers the idea of Airwolf, that sleek, black supersonic helicopter, the actual show has faded from mainstream memory, overshadowed by Knight Rider and other contemporaries. But if you watched Airwolf, you remember every detail. Stringfellow Hawk, a brooding cello-playing pilot, flies the world's most advanced helicopter on dangerous missions, always searching for his brother lost in Vietnam. It aired from 1984 to 1987, 3 network seasons and a cheaper 4th season in syndication that most fans pretend doesn't exist. John Michael Vincent played Hawk with a wounded intensity, and Ernest Borgnine was his mentor, Dominic Santini. That theme music, those aerial sequences, the way Airwolf would rise from its hidden mountain lair, rotors slicing the air, ready to rain down justice. You wanted to fly that helicopter. You wanted to be Stringfellow Hawk, complicated and heroic and impossible to pin down. The show had struggles, Vincent's personal demons, budget cuts, behind-the-scenes chaos. But for a few seasons, Airwolf was everything. And if you grew up with it, it still is. These shows didn't get the reruns. They didn't get the reboots or the nostalgia-driven revivals. Most of them barely made it past one season, canceled before they could fully spread their wings. But they mattered. They filled your afternoons, your Saturdays, those lazy hours when you'd flip through channels and find something unexpected. They taught you to dream bigger, to imagine worlds with robots and superpowers, time machines and supersonic helicopters. They gave you heroes who were flawed, strange, gloriously imperfect. And even if the rest of the world forgot them, some part of you never did. So here's my question for you. Which of these forgotten shows do you remember most? And if you could bring just one of them back, remake it, revive it, give it the second chance it deserved, which would it be? Tell me in the comments, and let's keep these 80s gems alive together. Thanks for watching Timewashed Stories. If this trip back to the forgotten corners of the 80s hit you right in the nostalgia, consider subscribing. There are more lost memories waiting to be rediscovered, and I'd love to have you along for the ride. Until next time, keep those memories alive.